Colian Noir, but I'm not. Hi, everybody. It's Bill Whittle here from Los Angeles, California, sitting in for Colian this week on NRA TV. And we've got a big full show for you, all kinds of interesting stuff, starting with, of course, the Oscars and especially your NRA's response to the Oscars. So I'm sure, like me, you didn't watch the Oscars because you really don't have much interest in being lectured to by people whose personal lives are in absolute ruins, whose financial lives would get them in jail, and whose standard of behavior really is just somewhere, just above street level. They used to put them in special pens, I think, back in the Middle Ages. In any event, as usual, and as it continues to increase all the time, during the Oscar ceremony, it was a chance for celebrities to stand up and talk about how much they hate the middle of the country, the half of the country that elected Donald Trump. And they also did it this year in a commercial. So we'd like to start off by showing you a commercial that was run by the New York Times. Yes, former newspaper, the New York Times, during the Oscar ads, and then we'll come back and we'll show you the NRA response.
The truth is, our nation is more divided than ever.
The truth is, alternative facts are just plain delusional.
The media needs to be held accountable.
The truth is, locker room talk is harmless.
The truth is, we need to put the safety of the American people.
The truth is, we need a full investigation of any ties to Russia.
The truth is,
in case you're wondering what that was, in reality, that was kind of the squeals and kicking of a dying animal, and it knows it's dying, and it's basically trying to tell you that unlike all the rest of the fake news out there, the New York Times can be counted on to provide nothing but the truth all the time. So we saw that during the Oscars, and then your NRA team worked incredibly quickly. I was absolutely stunned. I saw this the next morning. Here's the NRA response to the New York Times ad that ran during the Oscars.
Underemployed.
Chaos on the streets of Paris.
assassins working for the Mexican cartels.
Healthcare premiums are set to drastically spike next year.
Stocks all around the world are tanking.
A red line for us is we start saying,
if you like your doctor or healthcare plan,
If you like your
you can
healthcare
keep
plan,
it.
After the murder of this American done for the benefit of the
ISIS
cameras.
has reportedly executed 21 Coptic
The deadly terror attack on the U.S. consulate in Libya.
The number of dead would continue to go on.
59% increase there.
We are incapable of fighting or understanding.
This is a narcotics hotbed.
There were 3 separate requests for outside help.
It's work like that that makes me proud to have these letters behind me here. Not only was it a better video than the one that the New York Times ran, the most important aspect of it was up within hours. I mean, your NRA team just worked on that. I don't know how long they worked on it, but they had it up within hours while it was still on the news cycle. And it's made a bit of a splash, this response. So let's bring in one of our friends and certainly a person I've admired for a long time, William Jacobson from his Legal Insurrection blog. William, good to see you. How are you?
Great to see you.
Hey, so let's start this conversation, I think, with the subject of this New York Times ad and the NRA reply to it. And it's pretty much a one-word answer, and that word is credibility. Credibility is kind of an expensive character trait, isn't it, William? It's not something that you can just kind of buy on the cheap, and once it's gone, it's not easy to get back, and it takes a long time.
Well, that's certainly true in media. It's certainly true if you're a lawyer. It's certainly true if you're a broadcaster, that you really only have one reputation, and once you lose it, it's very hard to get it back. And I think this was an attempt by the New York Times to get it back because it's been really under siege for a long time, long before President Trump, for skewing the news, liberal bias. We've covered the New York Times bias for years and years at my website, and it's just so overwhelming. And it's not only what they say, it's what they don't cover. And I think that's why the NRA response was so brilliant. because it was pointing out a lot of the things that weren't being told. And so that selection process is so important to understanding media bias.
Yeah, that's it. I think exactly right. And we've known, those of us who are conservatives have known about this increasing media bias for the last, not just 8 years, 20 years probably. But I think, would you agree that during the last campaign, the 2016 presidential campaign, that basically the news media sacrificed whatever shreds of credibility they may have left in order to drag Hillary Clinton above, past the finish line, and they didn't do it. And now they know they not only they don't have their candidate, but they don't have any credibility anymore. And that's their product, right? That's what the New York Times is selling. It's selling, this is a reputable news source.
That's right. And the Gallup polling has shown that trust in the news media is at an all-time low, historic low. And so that reflects that. It's hard to say, was this year worse than 2008? I mean, 2008, they were absolute cheerleaders, smitten.
Yeah.
Chris Matthews' famous line about getting a tingle up his leg when Obama spoke. But I think this year maybe it was worse because it was nastier. They were in love with Obama. They weren't in love with Hillary Clinton. They just hated Donald Trump. So it had, to me, a nastier tone to it than 2008. Although, after 2008, it was hard to imagine it could get any worse.
Yeah, I remember in 2008, you would see pictures of Obama, and the photographer had to move into exact correct positions so that he could get a halo of light around the back of his head. And you'd see all of these pictures basically portraying him as Christ or something. And yes, I agree, they didn't like Hillary as much. What was it about this ad, though, William, that made you want to write about it so quickly on legal insurrection?
Sure. Well, I saw the ad before the Oscars, and like you, I didn't watch them either. And I was really actually quite upset that so many people in my Twitter feed were tweeting about the Oscars because I didn't really care. And I didn't find out till after the fact, long after the fact, about how they flubbed the Picture of the Year award. So I wasn't watching it either. But I did see that the New York Times was going to run this ad. And I watched it. And I was going to write something up before the Oscars about it. But I just couldn't really wrap my arms around what I wanted to say. It was pretentious. It was presumptuous. They were self-congratulatory, as if they are somehow more noble than anybody else.
Exactly.
But I couldn't quite put it together. And I actually put it together when I saw the NRA ad because it was so perfect. Because what I wasn't thinking when I first saw that New York Times advertisement is what the theme of the NRA ad was, why is it now important? Why wasn't it important 8 years ago? And then the ad runs through the litany of what Obama did wrong and how the media covered it up. I mean, why wasn't that as important? I mean, my goodness, look at how they dug back into Mitt Romney's high school days, cutting some student's hair without consent or something like that. It's amazing. And Rick
and 40
Perry,
reporters sent after Sarah Palin or something, ridiculous.
Yeah, and in whatever the year was, Rick Perry was with the Rock. Okay, there was a rock with
that's right.
a racist saying on it near a hunting ground that his family once used. Okay,
that's right.
How do they find that stuff out? But they never managed to get their hands on the tape of Obama with Rashid Khalidi, and
they buried it.
They buried it, and it's when they want to find things out, they can, but they didn't want to find anything out bad about the Obama administration.
Before we go to break, William, is something I think is kind of, there's a lot of lovely irony in this, and the last 2 or 3 months have just been, for people like us, just been, it's Christmas for 8 years of Christmas backed up. But it was Hillary Clinton right after the election loss who basically really kind of ran with this idea of fake news. She's kind of the person that let the genie out of the bottle and brought up the fact that it was fake news. Basically, she didn't say this verbatim, but we all know what she meant. Fake news stories cost her the election, and therefore we have to be worried about fake news. And now all of a sudden, the New York Times is on the defensive because that's exactly what this ad is. It is a very defensive ad saying, hey, we're not fake news. You can trust us. It's everybody else's fake news. Have they? Do you think these people have unleashed a monster that's going to eat them first?
Well, yes. I mean, everybody now associates the accusation of fake news with Donald Trump directing it at the media. But as you point out, it didn't start that way. It was really a Democratic talking point trying to absolve Hillary Clinton of any responsibility for anything, including her private server. So it was all just fake news. And then, and in very savvy, as he's done many times, he completely turned it around. And now the media is on the defensive. They've unleashed this concept of fake news, thinking they were immune to the charge, when in fact they're more guilty than anybody else. So I think it's very interesting. And the fact that the New York Times felt the need to run an advertisement during the Oscars, I think demonstrates that. And of course, running it during the Oscars is in a sense preaching to their choir. There's no minds were going to be converted. So it's curious why they bothered with it.
Choir's all they have left, William, you know? I mean, that's it. There's nobody in the pews anymore. There's nobody outside. There's no one in the parking lot. And there's not really that many people in the choir, to be honest with you. Most everybody has gone home. You know, it's so interesting because these people are so blind to this. The media jumped on Donald Trump for saying, Donald Trump said that the media is that news is the enemy of the American people. Media is the enemy of the American people. And at CPAC during his speech, he said they couldn't even get that quote right. I said fake news, not news. Fake news is the enemy of the American people. So even as they're reporting on Donald Trump slashing the media for being fake news, they're fake news in the way they report it.
That's right. And that was a perfect example of how the media manipulates things. He very clearly said that fake news is the enemy of the American people, which is actually consistent with what the media and the Democrats were saying when it was convenient to them earlier in the election cycle, when they were blaming Republicans and they were blaming Fox News and Breitbart and others. So they take his words, they then twist them, and they build multiple news cycles around something he didn't even say. And that is just time and again. You saw that when he made the comment at a rally about Sweden. And he says, you know, can you believe, you know, last night in Sweden? I knew exactly what he was talking to because I'd seen the same Fox News report he'd seen. And I've been covering Sweden for many years. They then say immediately what he said was he invented a fictitious terror attack that took place in Sweden last night. He never said there was a terror attack.
No.
Yes, he could have been more clear in what he said, but it was a rally, okay? It wasn't a prepared speech. And they didn't invent this entire false premise, this so-called straw man that they then seek to knock down, which is that he said there was a terror attack in Sweden last night and there was none. And they went on and on and on for days about that. And this is just classic of what they do.
And then after they talked about, what are you talking about? Sweden's wonderful. The next night, there were riots in the streets of Sweden. I tell you, sometimes it makes you think that big forces are on our side. William, we're going to come back to you after the break here. I want to talk a little bit about Donald Trump's relationship with the news media and how it seems like finally the good guys have somebody who not only knows how to fight these people, has just completely got their number. We'll be back in just a few minutes. This is the Coley and Noir Show on NRA TV. And we're back with the Colin Noir Show here on NRA TV. Colin is out for the week. I'm Bill Whittle, hosting from Los Angeles. And we're speaking to Professor William Jacobson of the website Legal Insurrection, who, as we should point out, is also a law professor at Cornell Law School, which makes him pretty much as rare as hen's teeth out there. You must be leading a lonely life out there, William. Do you feel like you got a target painted on your back, surrounded, 100% surrounded by the academicians out there?
That's right. I mean, I am the only open conservative on our entire law faculty of over 50 law professors. So I'm not the 1%. I'm actually the one. And on campus, it's not much better. The student newspaper did actually a very good job. They did a survey. They reached into election donation records. 97% of the faculty donations at Cornell University went to Democrats.
Yeah, that's right.
And I think it was another website surveyed 11 departments at Cornell and could not find a single Republican in any of those departments. So yes, it's a very lonely. But one thing that's really inspiring, we have a great group of young conservative students.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
And it's amazing. And I've always said, to be a conservative student on campus, you have to be better than the liberals, because you're going to be challenged at every turn on your ideas. You're going to be challenged, sometimes not in very nice ways. The liberal students have it easy. Everybody agrees with them. They never have to think through their positions. They never have to formulate cogent arguments, it's all very easy for them. But to be a conservative student on most modern campuses, you really have to be on your toes. And that really is inspiring. Some really wonderful.
I've worked with them several times. They've got moral courage. And in today's environment, to be honest with you, they've got some physical courage, too, because our left-wing tolerant friends, a little prone to violence, we notice when they don't get exactly what they want. I want to go back for a minute, William, and talk about Donald Trump and the way he's handling the press. My take on this is that he absolutely understands them. And I think Donald Trump, who comes off many times as thin-skinned, I think he's extremely thick-skinned. And here's what I'm interested in talking to you about. It seems to me that when he hit back at Meryl Streep has never gotten over it. I mean, she's never going to get over it. She made a speech condemning Donald Trump at the Golden Globes, and Donald Trump immediately tweeted saying she's overrated and she's a has-been and she's a sore loser. She's never going to get over that. And I kind of get that same vibe from this New York Times ad. You know, Donald Trump has said, the New York Times is fake news. They're a failing newspaper. These kind of words are not anything that the left is used to hearing, ever. You would get a politician previously say, well, I might disagree with the New York Times on this, but to have somebody come out and say, these guys, no, they're failing, they're going out of business, and the reason they're going out of business is they're a bunch of liars, and they don't know what to do.
Well, it's because he's building on a base of public perception. If the public believed the mainstream media, if the public trusted the mainstream media before Donald Trump ever came along, his attacks wouldn't be as effective. They are effective because he's playing on beliefs that people already have. People witness this. People understand it. I think survey after survey, not just Gallup, shows that people understand the media bias. That is something that the New York Times can't escape. So when Donald Trump attacks on that media bias and that media unfairness, it resonates with people.
It does.
And that's why it's so effective.
You know, there's a writer out there named Sarah Hoyt, and she has her own blog, and she sometimes guest blogs at Instapundit. And Sarah said, if you look at the pattern of these kind of media outlets, the pattern's pretty much the same, and she described it as roll left and die. That's basically what they do. When an organization like Newsweek, for example, starts facing really declining numbers, instead of doing the correct thing, the kind of thing that they did with Tylenol, where you said, look, we've got a problem here and we need to address it. We need to be honest with people and say, we've got a problem, we're working to fix it. That's not what they do. Sarah points out that what they do is, as their numbers decrease because they're so left-wing and so biased, they go further left. And they get even more into the weeds. And it seems to me like the New York Times is heading right down that road, and so is the Academy Awards as well, for that matter.
Right. Well, the Academy Awards had the lowest viewership in 9 years. Their viewership this year was just a little bit over half in raw numbers what it was in 1998 when we had a smaller population. So the viewership is down. People are tuning out. The New York Times, I don't know what their circulation is, but I know that revenue, they're really struggling. They, have loss after loss. They say they've gained a lot of new subscriptions every time Trump attacks them, but I wonder whether that's true. I don't believe it either. And how many of those are impulse purchases that get canceled a month later? So I don't believe it. The New York Times doesn't have the influence it used to have. That's not to say it's not influential. The New York Times still can set a media narrative. The difference is Donald Trump has Twitter. Donald Trump has this ability to attract the media, and he uses it to his advantage. I forget when it was, but there was sometime over this summer, I think it was, when he announced he was going to be making a very important announcement regarding Obama's birth certificate. And, the media couldn't wait to go there. They all flocked around, and he spent 20 or 25 minutes attacking the media. And then and his big announcement was, it's an old issue to me. I'm beyond it now. So it's almost like he suckered them in. It's like moths to a flame. And he did that the other day when he had a press statement. He spent 20 to 25 minutes in an absolute brutal takedown of the media, covered live by, I think, almost all of the networks. And they essentially gave him the platform. They gave him the audience that he then used to attack them. And so it's really a phenomenon that I don't know if anybody else could replicate that. I mean, as much as I love Ted Cruz and I supported Ted Cruz during the primaries, I don't know if he could pull this off.
He couldn't do this. There's no question he could do this. He would have just been savaged by the media, and he would have taken it, and he would have argued back with intellect and facts. But that's not how these people work, and that's not how you fight them. I think my favorite moment during the immediate aftermath of the election was they realized that this President Trump was going to be tweeting directly to the American people, and you heard the White House press correspondent saying this is the end of democracy. But what's really going on is, no, it's not the end of democracy. It's the end of the White House press corps is what it is. And the panic in the air is just really palpable. Let's just switch gears just a little bit, William, because when we look at the New York Times, there is no question it's dying, if for no other reason than it's printed on paper. I mean, for the New York Times to cover a story, they have to hear about the story. Somebody calls in with a story, and then they get an editor signs a reporter. A reporter gets in a car, goes on out there. He writes his stuff. He comes back in, writes the story, goes down to the copy room, and wait till the next edition's printed. That news is six hours old on a good day. The internet, on the other hand, is instantaneous, and that is why these legacy media outlets are losing people. There are alternatives, and we're on one of them right now. The NRA TV is an alternative, and your blog Legal Insurrection is an alternative. Do you think that these legacy media, Los Angeles Times, New York Times, do you think they're going to survive? Do you think they'll even be around in 5 years?
Well, it's hard to know. The New York Times does have a very successful website, and a lot of the newspapers, USA Today and many others, have increased their online presence. The problem is, it's hard to generate revenue. I mean, those paper subscriptions were incredibly lucrative for the newspapers, which cannot be replaced by, clicks and eyeballs and all those other things. As somebody who runs a website, trust me, it's not easy to make revenue just based upon traffic. And so they're struggling with, they have a legacy cost structure, but they have an internet revenue structure. And that's the problem. Not many newspapers or magazines have succeeded in getting people to pay for their content. I think the Wall Street Journal probably is the most successful, but most of them end up giving up because people don't want to pay for it. And even the New York Times has a very, a paywall which has many holes on it. And anybody with any inclination can figure out how to find their stories without having to pay for them. And that's a problem. So I think their problem is they have an internet revenue stream and a legacy media cost structure.
That's exactly right. And I'm sure you at Legal Insurrection and me over at BillWhittle.com, we do not have skyscrapers and limousines waiting for us outside. William, such a pleasure talking to you about this. You can find William's work. My pleasure. Is it legalinsurrection.com or .org?
.com.
Legalinsurrection.com. You can get really profound legal insights into the stories of the day by the only conservative law professor probably east of the Mississippi, something pretty much like that. Thanks again for joining us, William.
Thank you.
After the break, when we come back, you're welcome. Bye-bye.